Alright, I understand a lot of you guys are really excited that Kama's coming back for this Thanksgiving gacha, but let's not forget that we also have the GOAT going up on Rate Up in like a day or two. Yeah, that's right, I'm talking about Kiara. And I think a lot of you guys are going to be overlooking her rate up, and yeah, we do have, say, like Scotty and Melusine and all these, who cares, these other losers coming back on rate up for the month of December. But let's not pretend that Kiara's not in the mix of like a possible servant you might want to roll for. And you know, I had a lot of fun getting the footage for this video. For one, we took her to go farm some casters, some berserkers, we had her go fight herself, and then my friend even got some footage of her looping her NP 9 times in a row. I mean, this lady is still absolutely nuts. I know that when she dropped, she wasn't exactly the best servant. Like, she was good, but you kind of needed to get multiple copies of her, but that is just no longer the case. Kiara has 3 buffs on her, and they've definitely helped iron out a lot of her issues. And I would say she's not only usable in most scenarios in your arch teams, she's going to be one of your better options. I still break her out to go farm over on JP just because I think it's really funny. Because never when she came out for year 2 would anybody have assumed that she would have been capable of farming, but here she is. She's just doing the Lord's work out there, or I guess the Buddha's work. I don't know, the lore is very weird with Kiara, but you get what I'm saying. In this video, we're going to go over all of her stat skills, her NP. I'm going to be showing gameplay in the background to back up what I'm saying. But before we begin, make sure you leave a like on the video and you subscribe to the channel for that sweet daily FGO content so that you may stay informed on what is going on both versions of the game. Also, if you want to see me play FGO, I do that live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. That's going to be over on my Twitch, which is linked down in the description down below. But enough shilling all these different things, right? Let's get into the actual meat and potatoes of Kiara, starting off with her hits. And if you looked at her hits, you would not believe me if I told you that, hey, you could actually bring this servant out to go farming, and she actually does really well because she's got 0.55% NP gain. She only has a 3-hit AoE NP. There's no, like, crazy passives that are boosting her NP gain or anything. She just kind of looks like a good servant. Not bad, but on paper, she just looks really solid. I mean, her star gen's nothing super exceptional. Her quick cards are not super crazy. I mean, 3-hit arts cards for 0.55% NP gain, like, yeah, that's pretty standard, that's okay. 5-hit extra attack, we love to see that, but you gotta remember, sometimes there are servants that on paper don't look like they're going to be able to do what they're actually able to do, and then there's other servants that look really great on paper and are absolute frauds. Kiara is the first example where she just looks really tame at a first glance, but the way that her skills work and how they interact with Castoria is really insane. Now, I do want to go over some of her passives because these often get looked over, but they're actually really strong. You do have the nice little crit damage buff she has. You have a little bit of extra technical crit damage from independent manifestation. It's an extra 10%, it's fine. But then she has a nice defensive buff against humanoid enemies, and that's 16%, as well as class advantage against rulers, which is actually pretty nice. So the humanoid thing, that's pretty much every servant except like a handful of them. I'll show them on screen right now. And since her kit is tailored really well and it puts her in a favorable position going into challenging content, which most of which is going to be against servants, this is going to be very nice. And she just takes a little bit less damage than your normal DPSs, and it's one of her passive skills, so it's not like a buff that the boss can like mitigate or anything. And then being super effective against rulers does actually come up. You know, you occasionally have the ruler boss, but if you do want to use her as a farming servant, you know, occasionally you have like Jean or Amakusa as like the last guy in a free quest. And being able to be super effective against them is very convenient when it crops up. You know, one of the benefits of being an alter ego is that you're kind of like a pseudo berserker. You're super effective against casters, assassins, riders, and berserkers, but then, you know, you can kind of run into some issues if there's mixed class nodes, and she doesn't really run into that. I mean, sure, if you throw like a saber on like an assassin node, yeah, that's going to kind of trip her up a little bit, but if you have like a caster node and the final enemy is going to be like Jean or something, it's just really nice when it does crop up, especially against bosses as well, because some of the ruler bosses can be a real pain, especially if you don't have like Jalter or a Tyra to just utterly obliterate them. So having Kiara can be very convenient, and this just being a passive thing she's able to do. But let's start off by looking at her first skill. So on skill 1 over here, you've got an insane 50% battery, which is phenomenal for farming and for boss quest. If you need to get to your NP to just absolutely slam dunk the boss, you have that available to you. Or if you're missing out on a little bit of NP, you can also fire this. It's also really nice for, say, wave 3s on farming if you can preserve it there, because you're going to smack the enemy with a 30% art resistance down for 1 turn, meaning you're going to get real solid damage. Like, her damage is actually going to get to a really respectable level. We'll talk about that when we get to the NP. And this should always smack the enemy, because before all that, she's reducing the enemy's debuff resistance by 100% for a turn. So this should go through. It's like kind of guaranteeing she'll get this extra damage, and then getting a big fat battery to guarantee that her arts NP should be following up and taking advantage of this arts resistance down. I think the only way they could really make this better for, say, longer content is just make this a 3-turn buff. I think that would be kind of nice, but realistically, whenever you do have this, Kiara does get to a really respectable level of damage among AoE arts units in general. And so I think it's still fine. Maybe you could touch it up a little bit, or maybe, I don't know, they want to like buff the 3rd skill first, but I think that one's also pretty fine. But before we get to the 3rd skill, we got to cover the 2nd skill. This is another one of those ones that is good for wave 3 farming, because you're going to be reducing the enemy's defense by 30% for 3 turns. But if you're bringing her to long form content, this is just good sustainable damage, because even though the 1st skill only has, like, say, 1 debuff to really take advantage of, and it only lasts for 1 turn, this is at least going to stick there for 3 turns, and it's going to only be down for 3 turns. So you kind of have like a nice little permanent damage thing you've stuck on the opponent, especially if you're going to use this after using her 1st skill. You can kind of ensure that this defense down demerit will actually stick, and then your Kiara will be looking pretty good for the next 3 turns. Now, the other 2 effects have no use at all for farming. If you're using her for farming, just smack it on the 3rd wave, kind of like you would use Caster Scotty's skill for quick farming. But in challenging content, both of these skills are very, very powerful. For one, the first effect of this skill is going to be reducing all enemies' NP gauge by 1, giving you some level of NP control, and that might buy you a critical turn for one of your other skills to come up. Say it's Castoria's 3rd skill, you really need that invincibility, or maybe it's allowing Castoria to get to her own NP, maybe it's Tamamo firing an NP that then lowers your other skill cooldowns, stuff along those lines. Just effectively buying you a turn against an enemy NP is very strong, and it also removes all of their buffs, which is crazy. Now, on its own, it might not be that useful against bosses, because sometimes they have unremovable buffs, and they might just give themselves like big defense, dodge buffs so that for like a certain amount of turns where they have a chance to dodge, or invincibility for a certain amount of attacks. But still, being able to remove, say, buffs of like the boss buffing their healing effectiveness and that kind of getting out of hand, or they start giving themselves a lot of attack buffs, so they're starting to really hit hard. Being able to just deny them all of that is always going to be strong, especially if they do have, say, survivability buffs that are removable. It can be very strong to go ahead and just remove that from the boss, although for Kiara, even if she can't remove survivability buffs, she has a way to get around that on her NP. But first, let's circle back to the 3rd skill over here, which is just a whole smorgasbord of good effects. Now, if they did want to buff this, you could just make all of these effects aside from the invincibility 3 turns, and she just becomes stupid nutty broken for this. Because when this initially dropped, we had another skill like this for Tama Lancer, but it stunned her instead of dealing the HP damage. But for Kiara, that doesn't matter. Spoiler alert, she heals so much more than she takes damage on this 3rd skill, especially with that healing rate buff of 50%, that it doesn't matter. She offsets the damage by such a large amount that you barely even feel it. And that's on top of giving herself invul for a turn, just in case your Castorias are going down and you just need to survive an extra turn. Getting 50% crit damage is nice, on top of her passives giving her 10%, so she can actually do decent enough crits, nothing super insane. You shouldn't tailor her to be a crit servant, but 60% crit damage is still 60% crit damage. You'll get some nice turns on that. The 50% NP gain buff is an absolutely insane amount for her to be getting. Most servants would kill to have a buff this strong, and it actually allows her to do farming without the need of like mystic codes or plug suiting in other guys. I mean, even if she didn't have it, you could just like plug suit in a waiver to kind of help her out a little bit, but just having this and all the farming that I'm showing, she doesn't really need to plug suit out for like additional guys, or I don't have to use too many different buffs because she just has this insane NP gain boost sitting in her back pocket. And then just as a whole, it's a very, very strong skill that just allows her to mainly survive for a turn, but on top of that, get extra buffs and just extra utility out of this. And I just like that the healing rate received isn't just a random thing they threw on there, because I guess if we jump over to her NP, as you can see, she's healing anywhere from 5 to 10,000 of her own HP every time she fires her own NP. Which normally I don't go super crazy for healing. I'm like, oh, whoop-de-doo, 2k healing on a skill, I'm sure that's going to help you live. But for Kiara, it helps her stick around for an insanely long time, because 5k on an NP that you can spam numerous times means that she's probably going to be finishing the fight at next to full HP, if not exactly at full HP. And then, like I was mentioning earlier for the third skill takes away 3k of your own HP. This heals you by 5k, plus the healing rate received being 50% of that means you would get an additional 2,500 on that, meaning you get a 7,500 heal at bare minimum. And even after the 3k damage, you're still getting 4,500 HP back. Like, it's absolutely ludicrous how it synergizes with her. And then, God forbid you put Castoria's NP in front of her own to just try to get that attack buff to boost her damage up a little bit, then she's just going to be getting even more healing. Like, it just gets ludicrous. And like I mentioned earlier, even if she can't remove the enemy's defensive buffs, she pierces invul and pierces defense always. This is an insane combo to have built into your NP, because it basically means outside of solemn defense, you are always going to smack the enemy. They are always going to be losing health. Even if you don't have all of her debuffs down and all the attack buffs are down, she's still at least always progressing the fight by doing more damage. She's still inching closer to the finish line, and there's really nothing they can do about it. The only thing that I want to talk about right now is the damage over here. If you look at the damage chart, you're like, dang, she's really high up there. Even at NP1, why are people saying that I need to get numerous copies? Like, she's almost at 30k, and you do have to understand the caveat with that is having the defense down and the arts debuff down. So like in challenge quests, that's kind of real damage, but only for a turn. You got to understand it's going to go down a bit once you lose the 30% debuff down. And then for farming, you're going to lose a lot of that because she's really just going to be relying on Castoria's buffs, which will help her out a little bit. It'll give her attack buffs, it'll give her a big arts buff, and you'll mainly see this bigger damage on wave 3. So do keep that in mind if you do have like an NP1 Kiara. You could try to mitigate the damage if you've like foed her up or you've grailed her a little bit. I know you guys are pretty degenerate. I know some of you guys have probably grailed your Kiaras. Don't try to deny it, alright? I know. I've seen you guys in some of the streams. I know who's grailing their Kiaras and whatnot. I see you guys out there. But overall, in all seriousness, this is a phenomenal unit, right? I don't want to see any downplay for Kiara because I have been using this unit since year 2. And every time she gets buffed, she just keeps getting better and is really not aging poorly at all. I'm not trying to make it a point that you have to use her for farming. I just think it's very interesting that this is a unit that is very strong in difficult content that can also double as a farmer for you and can do it pretty effectively. Especially because Arch just has access to so many strong CEs that either offer you starting charge plus like NP damage, NP gain, arts boost. You could use Black Grail because Castoria over here gives you 100% of your NP back. And we also have strong Mystic codes that play very nicely with the different art servants. And especially if you're going to use Black Grail, it's like, well, my Kiara is missing 50% of her NP. It's like, well, you're going to plug suit in for Oberon anyway, so I think you're going to be fine. So she just happens to play very nicely with being an art servant. And I think like, man, we could have lived in a different game where she was a quick unit and she'd just be a lot worse. She'd still probably be decent because her skill set is good, but just her being an arts unit seems to be like the perfect storm. Because even if she was Buster, I don't think she'd be looping back in challenge quests as well as she is right now. So this is a unit that I'm definitely going to be giving the A+ rating to. I do want to say that she is like an S tier unit, but I know that I'm very biased towards Kiara. So I'm going to kind of hold back a little bit and say that, yeah, okay, she is an A+ unit. But if it makes you feel any better on my judgment, on NA, I use her at NP1, and on JP, I got lucky enough to get her at NP3 because for last year's GSSR, they gave me 2 and 1, so that was really nice. I was like, cool, now we have NP3 Kiara, and I will say if you go for the extra copies, it feels a lot more powerful. Like, you definitely get to feel how much better she does get, which is also why I can't maybe justify her being S tier, because at NP1 there can be a little bit of struggles. I don't think it's as big of a deal as it was in year 2. I think trying to use a year 2 mindset in like year 8 going on to year 9 FGO is really moronic. I don't think that's the right way to be thinking about things. But that does at least still exist there. Like, that problem does still exist, and you definitely feel that this unit gets a lot stronger when they start reaching like NP2 or 3, as opposed to, say, more modern units, like, say, Kukulkan, who I know is insanely good and is very recent, but for example, she at NP1 feels really, really strong. Like, she already feels good enough. Going for NP2 or 3 is just like icing on the cake for that one. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If there's another unit you would like to see me cover from the Thanksgiving Gacha, or one that is coming up, let me know that down in the comments down below as well. I might bring back the Low Star Legend series. I haven't forgotten about it. It's just we've had a lot going on, ironically enough, on NA for like the last month, so I haven't really found a time to cover some of those guys. But hey, if there's a guy you want to see, drop it in the comments down below as well, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace, Blade.